Okay, so today we're diving into The Art of War,
By Sun Tzu.
right by Sun Tzu, a
Yeah.
classic, I've
Mhm.
got to admit.
Yeah.
I've always been kind of fascinated by this one
Yeah.
because it's a military treatise, but you see it applied everywhere,
Oh,
like
yeah.
in business and self-help, like all over the place.
hmm
So what is it about this ancient text that still resonates so much today? You sent over some fascinating excerpts.
Well, I think what makes The Art of War so enduringly relevant is that Sun Tzu wasn't just writing about tactics for a specific time or place.
Right.
He was really delving into like these really fundamental truths about human nature, about strategy, about competition and power dynamics.
Yeah,
And those things, those truths, they transcend any particular era.
they're timeless.
Exactly. So whether you're, facing a conflict on a literal battlefield or you're navigating a tough negotiation at work or even just trying to figure out, a personal dilemma,
Yeah.
those principles, those underlying principles, they still hold true.
So less about the swords and shields, more about the psychology of conflict, right?
Exactly. It's about understanding the human element, the psychology of competition, and that's why it can be applied to so many different areas of life.
That makes sense. So, like, where would be a good place to even start with the art of war?
Well, I think a great starting point is one of Sun Tzu's most famous principles, which is know yourself and know your enemy.
Okay, know yourself and your enemy. So that sounds pretty straightforward in theory,
Sure.
but what does that actually look like in practice? Like, can you give me a concrete example of how that principle might play out, say, in the 21st century?
Absolutely, yeah. So let's say you are going into a big negotiation at work.
Okay.
Knowing your enemy in this context would mean, really doing your homework,
Well,
gathering as much information as you can about the other party, their goals, their motivations, their pressures, their track record, their communication style. I don't think it's important to emphasize this doesn't mean like, spying or being underhanded.
right.
It's more about, just really paying attention, being observant, doing your research.
It's strategic.
Exactly. It's strategic information gathering.
Yeah.
So you can understand their perspective as
Okay.
well as your own.
It reminds me of that passage in the excerpts you sent over where Sun Tzu says something like, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles.
Yeah, that's it. That's the one.
It's about anticipating their moves by understanding who they are.
Right. Exactly. And I think the knowing yourself part is equally crucial,
Yeah.
because it's about really being honest about your own strengths, your weaknesses, your tendencies, where are you prone to making mistakes, what are your blind spots,
Right.
what are your emotional triggers.
So it's kind of a two-way street. You got to know yourself inside and out, but also really take the time to understand the other player in the situation.
Exactly. And by doing both of those things, by having that deep level of self-awareness and also that understanding of your opponent or the other party involved, you can make much more strategic, informed decisions.
So you're not just reacting emotionally or blindly, you're actually thinking several steps ahead.
Precisely. And that leads us to another core principle that Sun Tzu emphasizes,
Okay.
which is the idea of favoring strategy over just brute force.
Okay.
He actually has this very famous line where he says, the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting.
Wow. Subdue the enemy without fighting. Okay, that almost seems counterintuitive, right? It's like coming from a book about war, you'd think it'd be all like charging into battle.
Yeah, you'd think so, but Sun Tzu, he really believed that a truly skilled strategist aims to achieve victory while minimizing conflict.
Okay.
And that's done through careful planning, through maneuvering, through anticipating the opponent's actions.
It's like a mental chess game almost.
It is, yeah. It's about outsmarting your opponent, not necessarily overpowering them.
Okay, so how does that apply to a more, I don't know, modern setting? Like, how do you subdue an enemy without fighting in, say, the business world?
Okay, so think about this. Let's say you have a competitor, right?
Okay.
Instead of going head-to-head with them in this very public, very costly battle,
Right.
which could deplete both of your resources,
Mm-hmm.
a more strategic approach might be to find a way to outmaneuver them,
Okay.
to achieve your goals without that direct confrontation. Maybe you find a niche market that they've overlooked. Maybe you form a strategic alliance that gives you a competitive advantage.
It's like you're achieving your objectives without having to engage in this big, messy fight.
Exactly. You're conserving your resources, you're minimizing risk, and you're ultimately achieving a more sustainable victory.
Okay, that's really interesting. So if brute force isn't always the answer, what are some of the other tools that Sun Tzu suggests using? Like, what are some of the hallmarks of his approach to strategy?
Well, he really emphasizes adaptability
Okay.
and deception.
Deception. Okay, now hold on. Before we get into, like, advocating for trickery and lying, I know Sun Tzu was writing in a very specific context.
Of course, yeah. And we're not suggesting that anyone go out and, start deceiving people in their everyday lives.
Right, right.
But I think if we look at deception through a more modern lens, it's really about understanding the power of perception and strategic positioning.
Okay, so how would that play out, like, practically speaking?
So let's take that negotiation scenario again, right? Sun Tzu might say something like, appear weak when you are strong and strong when you are weak. Now, obviously, we're not talking about outright lying.
Right.
But it could mean, for example, downplaying your eagerness to close a deal in order to gain a strategic advantage, right?
No.
Or maybe highlighting certain aspects of your position while subtly downplaying others.
So it's more about, like, I don't know, a calculated presentation of yourself. Not necessarily like, being dishonest, but maybe just kind of strategically revealing or concealing certain information.
Exactly, yeah. It's about shaping the perception.
Right, and that makes sense. It's like in poker, you don't want to show all your cards right away.
Right, exactly.
You want to keep some things close to the vest.
And adaptability, I think, is even more important today than it was back in Sun Tzu's time.
Okay, how so?
Well, the world we live in now, everything changes so rapidly.
Yeah.
Think about technology, think about the global economy, think about, geopolitics. Everything is in constant flux.
But you got to be able to pivot.
Exactly. You have to be able to pivot. So you might have this brilliant plan, everything's all laid out, but then, something unexpected happens.
Right.
A competitor makes a surprise move, or a new technology emerges, or, the market takes a sudden downturn. And you have to be able to adapt.
You got to adjust on the fly.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Sun Tzu really understood, that rigidity can be fatal.
You can't be too stuck in your ways.
You can't be too attached to your plan.
Right.
You have to be able to flow with the changes, adjust your strategy, and that's where true mastery lies.
That totally reminds me of something that happened at work just last week.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we were, working on this big project, and we had this whole plan, all mapped out. And then, like, literally at the last minute, the client, like, changes the entire direction of what they wanted. And we had to, like, completely rethink our approach.
Yeah.
Adapt to this new set of circumstances.
Exactly. And those are the moments when I think Sun Tzu's wisdom is the most valuable.
Yeah, totally. So Sun Tzu, he's all about strategy, about being adaptable, about kind of outmaneuvering your opponent rather than just going in guns blazing.
Right.
But he also talks a lot about something else that I think is super relevant today, which is choosing your battles.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Knowing when to engage and when to walk away.
Yes. Like the art of just saying, nope, not worth it. I admit that's what I'm still working on, like sometimes it's hard to just let things go.
Yeah, it's a skill, it's a muscle that you have to develop,
Yeah, it's a practice.
Because I think in our culture, we often have this idea that you have to fight every battle. You have to, respond to every provocation.
Right.
But Sun Tzu recognized that engaging in every single conflict can actually be really draining.
Yeah.
Unproductive. Sometimes the most strategic move is to disengage, to conserve your energy, your resources for battles that truly matter.
Okay, but then how do you know which battles to pick?
Well, I think Sun Tzu would say you have to look at the potential gains and losses, Is this conflict aligned with your overall goals?
No.
What will it cost you in terms of time, energy, resources? And sometimes walking away can actually be a sign of strength, not weakness.
It's about being strategic.
Exactly.
Okay, so, and finally, I know we can't talk about the art of war without talking about leadership.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Because, clearly Sun Tzu placed a lot of emphasis on the qualities of a good leader. Like, what did he consider to be the hallmarks of effective leadership?
So Sun Tzu believed a leader should be wise, courageous, benevolent, and above all, able to inspire trust and loyalty in their followers.
Okay, so, I can definitely see how those qualities would be important on a battlefield, right? But what about in a more, I don't know, like a 21st century corporate setting? Are those same qualities still relevant?
More than ever, I think. Because if you think about it, a CEO leading a company through a challenging time, they have to make tough decisions, they have to inspire their team, they have to navigate uncertainty. Those same qualities that Sun Tzu wrote about all those centuries ago, the wisdom, the courage, the ability to build trust, they are still absolutely essential.
It's about the human element.
Exactly. And that's why the art of war, while it was written in a very specific context, it still has so much to teach us about leadership, about strategy, about really just understanding ourselves and the world around us.
So what I'm taking away from The Art of War today is, it's not just about winning battles. It's about understanding the nuances of human interaction.
Yeah.
It's about self-awareness, it's about adaptability, and it's about making strategic choices that lead to long-term success, whatever that looks like for you.
Mhm.
So thank you for taking us on this deep dive
Yeah, it was a
into
pleasure.
The Art of War.
Always happy to discuss Sun Tzu. And for our listeners, I'll leave you with one final thought to ponder. Sun Tzu emphasized the importance of information.
Right.
But we live in a world now where we are bombarded with information
Yeah.
constantly. So the challenge, I think, for all of us is to become more discerning consumers of information. How can you, like a skilled strategist, learn to filter out the noise, to separate the signal from the noise?
So it's not just about having access to information, it's about knowing what to do with it, right?
Exactly. It's about using information strategically to make informed decisions, to gain an advantage, to achieve your goals. So I'll leave you with that thought. Think about how you can use information to your advantage in this information-saturated world.
That's something to definitely think about.
It is.
All right, well, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye.